English Literature, Introduction to Poetry, Elegy written in a country churchyard by Thomas Gray. Brief questions with answers. Episode 2. Question 44. Find out the figures of speech in the paths of glory lead but to the grave. Answer. This kind of statement is called epigram. Apparently, there is a contradiction in this statement because the paths of glory do not lead one to success but to grave. However, the truth beneath the contradiction is that whatever may be one's achievement on earth, one's life ends in grave. There is also alliteration in the repetition of G in the glory and grave. Question 45. Name the figure of speech in can storied urn or animated bust back to its mansion called the fleeting breath. Answer. There is a metaphor in the use of the word mansion, since it has been implicitly compared to a human body. Question 46. What figure of speech do you find in the following lines? Can honor's voice provoke the silent dust, or flattery soothe the dull, cold ear of death? Answer. Honor, flattery, and death are personification because lifeless concepts are treated as living beings. They are imagined to behave like human beings. There is also a cast of eroticis or rhetorical question that confirms a strong negative answer. Question 47. What figure of speech is there in the phrase silent dust in Gray's elegy? Answer. The phrase means a dead body. There is use of euphemism, which is a pleasant expression for an unpleasant thing. Question 48. Name the figure of speech in the line, some heart once pregnant with celestial fire. Answer. It is a case of synecdoche. Here heart is a part used for the whole, the man. Question 49. Name the figure of speech in the rod of empire might have shot and waked to ecstasy the living liar. Answer. These are roundabout way of expressions called circumlocution. Question 50. What figure of speech do you find in the use of hands? Hands that wrought the rod of empire might have swat. Answer. There is synecdoche in the use of hands because hands suggest the plowman part for the whole. Question 51. Name the figure of speech in a line, but knowledge to their eyes are ample page. Answer. Knowledge has been given life, so it is a case of personification. Question 52. Name the figure of speech in the line. Chill penury expressed their novel rage. Answer. Here is an example of personification. The abstract word penury has been given life. Question 53. Name the figure of speech in the line and forge the genial current of the soul. Answer. In this line, the genial current of the soul is a roundabout way of expression for joy. It is an example of circumlocution. Question 54. Find out the figure of speech in the lines. Full many a gem of purest ray serene. The dark, unfathomed caves of ocean bear. Answer. There is a use of metaphor since the dead villagers have been implicitly compared to gems. Question 55. Find out the figure of speech in the lines. A full many a flower is born to blush unseen and waste its sweetness on the desert air. Answer. Here the villagers who die unknown have been implicitly compared to the desert flowers. The flowers have been used as a metaphor. Question 56. What figure of speech do you think is in some village Hampden that with dauntless breast? Answer. It is an allusion since Hampden alludes to John Hampden, 1594 to 1643, the MP for Buckinghamshire, who protested against the tyranny of Charles I. It is also a case of synecdoche because an individual has been used for all the protestors. Question 57. Name the figure of speech in some mute, inglorious Milton here may rest. Answer. Here is synecdoche because an individual has been used for a class. A class of talented poets has been suggested by Milton. It is also a case of allusion. Question 58. What historical poet does the speaker refer to in elegy? Answer. The speaker refers to John Milton in elegy. Question 59. Who was Cromwell? Answer. Under Oliver Cromwell's leadership, King Charles I was imprisoned, tried, and beheaded in 1649. After the death of the King, Cromwell ruled England from 1649 to 1658. He was known for his bravery. Question 60. Why was it impossible for the villagers to achieve great things? Answer. It was impossible for the villagers to achieve great things because their lot forbade. Question 61. Who do wild throw slaughter to a throw? Answer. The politicians go to power by killing their opponents. The villagers' fate did not allow them to go to power through bloodshed. Question 62. Name the figure of speech in the line. To scatter plenty over smiling land. Answer. There is metonymy in the use of the word land since it suggests it's related to word people. Question 63. What figure of speech do you find in the line or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame? Answer. Luxury and pride are personifications because they have been treated as living beings. In the second line, there is an implicit comparison between flattering words and incense. It is a case of metaphor. Question 64. To whom and what? The line far from the madding crowds ignoble strife refers. Answer. The line refers to the urban people and their mercantile activities. Question 65. Who implore whom for the passing tribute of a sigh? Answer. The tombs of the dead villagers implore the passers-by for the passing tribute of a sigh. Question 66. What is meant by many a holy text? Answer. The phrase means quotations from the Bible. Question 67. To what does the poet refer by the line, for who to dump forgetfulness I pray? Answer. The poet suggested universal truth by quoted line. The line means that every human being has an inherent desire to be remembered by the living ones. Question 68. What figure of speech do you find in for who to dump forgetfulness I pray? Answer. There is personification in the use of forgetfulness because it has been treated as a heinous living creature. Question 69. Name the figure of speech in the phrase pleasing anxious. Answer. It is a case of oxymoron because the two opposite words, pleasing and anxious, have been placed together. Question 70. Name the figure of speech in the line left the warm precinct of the cheerful day. Answer. There is a sense of metaphor in the implicit comparison between the cheerful day and warm precinct. Question 71. What kind of expression is the line some pious drops the closing eye requires? Answer. It is an aphoristic expression because it refers to the universal truth about every person's ultimate desire. Question 72. What is the figure of speech in the line nor cast one longing lingering look behind? Answer. There is alliteration in the words longing lingering look because L has been repeated thrice. Question 73. Name the figure of speech in the line. Even from the tone of the voice of nature cries, even in our ashes live there wanted fires. Answer. There is anaphora in the repetition of even. Question 74. Name the figure of speech in the line. Now drooping, awful one, like one forlorn. Answer. There is a simile in like one forlorn and a case of alliteration in awful one. Question 75. Find out the figures of speech in the line. Or crazed with care, or crossed in hopeless love. Answer. There are two cases of alliteration in this line. E has been repeated thrice and L has been repeated twice at the beginning of stressed syllables. Question 76. Name the figures of speech in the here rest his head upon the lap of earth. Answer. The phrase lap of earth is metaphor because earth has been implicitly compared to a mother. The use of head is an example of synecdoche since the part head has been used to suggest the whole body. Question 77. What figures of speech do you find in the lines? Fair signs bronze not on his humble birth, and melancholy marks him for her own. Answer. Science and melancholy are personifications because they have been treated as living beings. Question 78. How does the speaker imagine that he will be remembered after he dies? Answer. The speaker imagines that he will be remembered after his death as a nature lover. Question 79. From whom does Gray desire recognition? Answer. Gray desires recognition from the humble, hoary-headed swan. Question 80. What does the speaker of Gray's elegy stress upon? Answer. The speaker of Gray's elegy stresses upon the equalizing nature of death. Question 81. Why does the speaker think that the dead villagers do not have fancy monuments over their graves? Answer. Because their relatives were too humble and poor to afford fancy monuments. Question 82. What is the speaker's attitude towards the dead villagers? Answer. The speaker's attitude towards the dead villagers is genuinely compassionate. Question 83. What is the speaker's attitude towards the rich? Answer. The speaker's attitude towards the rich is scornful and cynical. Question 84. What new classical elements do you find in Gray's elegy? Answer. Gray's elegy is full of figures of speech, most of which are artificially used. Moreover, Gray has used gaudy diction and perfect versification. All these are new classical elements. Question 85. What is the speaker's attitude to nature in Gray's elegy? Answer. The speaker's attitude to nature in Gray's elegy is that of the romantic part. Here, nature takes the shape according to the mood of the speaker. Question 86. Give a few examples of inversion, hyperbaton from Gray's elegy. Answer. And all the year a solemn stillness holds. All the year holds a solemn stillness, where heavens the turf in many a mouldering heap, where the turf heaves, or climb his knees the envied keys to share, or climb his knees to share the envived kiss. With uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture. Question 87. Give at least 3 examples of consonants from Gray's elegy. Answer. Consonance is a figure of speech in which the last consonant of 2 or more words is repeated without repeating the vowels before them. Here are 3 examples. Clarion or the echoing horn, line 19. Soothe the dull cold ear of death, line 44. Sun upon line 100. Thank you viewers for watching my video.